Hello, hello, hello. My name is Jean Tiberio, and I'm a nutritionist and a wellness coach. Welcome to Healing Outside the Box. This is episode 245, and it's about the halo effect as it pertains to weight loss goals. A couple of quick notes before I get going. First, both Google and Amazon now have podcasting options in their apps. Right now, there are so many apps that allow you to listen to podcasts, but sometimes people just like to go straight to Apple Podcasts or Google Podcasts and now Amazon Music. So if you have Amazon Prime, you can get the podcast for free off of your phone. It's under Amazon Music. It's called the Amazon Music app, and it's free for Prime members with both iPhone and Android. I have an iPhone, so I just went to the App Store, search for Amazon Music, and then tap Amazon Music free with Prime. Install it, and then click Get Started. After that, just follow the prompts. Tap the word Find on the bottom, then Podcasts. Oh, and of course, there's always Spotify. The free version will get you most, if not all, of your favorite podcasts. The second thing I'd like to say is that I do online health and wellness coaching during the day, and I've got room for more clients right now. So if you're fed up with this year, as I'm thinking you might be, you may want to talk to a nutritionist and coach about your wellness goals for next year. You can just sign up for health and wellness coaching on my website. I have different plans available according to what suits your needs, but usually people will do weekly for, 2 or 3 months, then bi-weekly or monthly until they've reached their maintenance goals. My website is, no surprise, healingoutsidethebox.com. So you can just go to the website and click Wellness Coaching at the top. I'll give you a link in the show notes as well. So just jump on board and let's ride this gravy train out of the year 2020. Okay, back to the episode. So what is this halo effect? The halo effect is generally a term that's been used in management or maybe psychology, and it's defined as overestimating one aspect of a person when evaluating because of another specific positive trait. The example that is often given would be, say, if a supervisor found an employee to be funny or attractive and then gave them a more positive performance evaluation, or maybe even a promotion based on the employee's popularity rather than merit. The halo effect has been getting some attention over the past few years when it comes to, say, promoting or advertising food. In my opinion, the halo effect is to blame, in part at least, for the bad name that is given to foods that might not be that bad at all. And if you listened to last week's episode, I talked about how labeling foods as good or bad after they've been processed and combined with other foods can be confusing. So the halo effect when it comes to food is about perceiving a particular food to be healthy based on perhaps only one word on the label. Back in the 80s and 90s, the magic word was low fat. A manufacturer could jam as much extra sugar in that product as his little heart desired, as long as they took out some of the fat, and the product would go flying off the shelves. Now, back in the old days, as a food scientist, I worked for Lipton in their wishbone department, and I made salad dressings. We were taking out the vinegar, taking out the fat, and adding sugar. Yes, you heard me. We added mounds of sugar to salad dressing. Also, we added more chemical preservatives to this salad dressing because the vinegar that we took out was needed to keep the product from spoiling. Now, as we all know, since that time, sugar has become the bad guy, and fat is now seen as our savior. Well, that's not exactly true either. Sometimes fat is not really our savior. The perfect example that comes to mind is coconut oil. We Americans see coconut oil on the label of a product, and it goes right into the grocery basket. I remember saying to someone in passing that coconut oil is actually high in saturated fat and will raise your bad LDL cholesterol. This person looked shocked to hear the news. I think they mentioned something to the effect that the label said it was healthy. Oh, I'm sure it did. But see, that's the problem. There are a bunch of studies showing that we are all influenced by the nutrition trends of the day and the labeling on the products, which reflect that. That's why there has to be laws about truth in labeling. Otherwise, coconut oil could be the new snake oil, in that it would claim to be curing everything. A graduate student at Cornell did a double-blind study looking at this issue. This woman was in the management department, not the food science department, which I found interesting. Perhaps I'm the only one. The two groups were divided between those that saw organic on the label and those that saw regular on the label. The group overwhelmingly thought that the products labeled organic were lower in fat and calories than the regular products, even though they were tasting the same product. I can put a link to that article in the show notes. But remember, this can only be done with processed foods that are generally found in the middle of the store. It is much easier to evaluate foods in their original form, which is generally the foods that border the inside aisles. But in general, if you're curious, turn to the nutrition label and look at the total calories, saturated fat, sugar, and sodium. If you want to look at the ingredients, which might actually be more eye-opening, watch what ingredient comes first on the label. By law, they have to list the ingredients by unit weight. So if sugar is your first ingredient on the label, the product has a lot of sugar. Now, of course, how you evaluate that depends on the product. If you're buying sugar, then sugar is going to be first on the label. So the type of food you're buying may have more or less of those nutrients based on the particular recipe. In other words, if you're buying soup, you're bound to see relatively more sodium and less sugar. Just the sodium level will tell you what you want to know. When people say to me that organic items in the store are much more expensive than their regular counterparts, we generally get into a conversation about what's important to get organic and what's not as important to get organic. Because realistically, and I include myself in this, we all watch in horror when the woman at the cash register tells us that we owe them over $200 for a bunch of things in our grocery cart. No one wants to spend extra money needlessly. Okay, I certainly get that. I look at the pile of items on the conveyor belt, and then I look at the woman, and then I look back at the pile of items again, and then I look at the woman again. I don't know what I'm hoping for, but I get it. But I also spend a lot of time thinking about food safety and the real meaning of healthy food. So I'm conflicted, to say the least. And there's also this. If we get diagnosed with diabetes or heart disease, we are going to be spending a heck of a lot of money on healthcare to keep ourselves from getting all those horrible complications. In the past, I have sat next to someone by their hospital bed after they've had a foot or leg amputation, and it's heartbreaking to see someone suffer when I know it can be prevented. In an ideal world, what I'd like to see happen is to wipe the slate clean and start over, growing most food locally, obviously without tons of pesticides, anhydrous ammonia fertilizer, Roundup, and preservatives. But that is not going to happen anytime soon. So the best advice I can offer at this point is to look for foods that are as close to their natural state as possible. And there are plenty of those. And as much as possible, get some high-quality ingredients and cook at home. The one silver lining to this year is perhaps some of us are learning how to cook again. Now, it is true that if a food item is low fat or low sodium, it's probably better than its relatives next to them on the shelves. But never say always, because these foods, as I've mentioned, may have more sugar added to make up for those other ingredients. And maybe just keep in mind, as you're going up and down the grocery aisles, that some of this marketing might fall into the health halo category. Here are some specific examples. Number 1. As I've already mentioned, coconut oil is a good example of a food that some health experts touted as an ingredient that is really good for you. They'll say it has no cholesterol, which is true, but it never had any since it's a plant. But what it does have is plenty of saturated fat. Even though people are talking about diabetes more than heart disease, we still want to take care of our hearts, ladies and gentlemen, because they are so very good to us, and our hearts work very hard. Number 2, sugar in the raw. This is simply the same as regular table sugar, except that it is slightly less refined than white sugar. The refining process takes out a little molasses, normally the byproduct of sugar refining. Nutritionally speaking, they are basically the same. Number 3, Greek yogurt. This is definitely a healthy food, but is it much different than regular yogurt? Greek yogurt is actually a denser form of yogurt, which basically means that some of the water has been filtered out. On an ounce per ounce basis, it has more nutrients than regular yogurt simply because the water has some weight to it. Either way, yogurt is good for us. Active cultures, even better. The important thing to remember about yogurt is that the flavored yogurts do have added sugar. Quite a bit of it, actually. That is true about Greek yogurt as well. If possible, get the plain yogurt and add your own fruit or sweetening ingredients. Number 4, Nutella. That's that chocolate nut spread. Nutella is popular with health-conscious people, but it has been criticized lately for not deserving the claims on their label. So let's read the ingredients list. Here it is. Sugar. This comes first. So this ingredient is in a higher amount than any other ingredient. Next, we have palm oil, a very unhealthy saturated oil. Then we have hazelnuts. Then we have milk. In here we thought it was dairy-free. Then dry cocoa, soy lecithin, and vanilla flavoring. Now, as for almond milk, cashew milk, and other nut milks, these technically should not be in the dairy or milk category because they're technically nuts. And nutritionally speaking, they are fine. Number 5, gluten-free breads and cereals. Now here I'm going to virtually jump on my soapbox. Okay, so here's the deal with gluten. And I don't mind repeating this because, as Barack Obama and Kevin Hart are fond of saying, it's what I do. It's what I do. Now, gluten is a large protein that is basically two smaller proteins linked together. The large protein has to be broken up before it can go through that thin, very delicate layer of cells between your intestines and your bloodstream. So it has to get into the bloodstream in a small, recognizable size. Recognizable to your immune system, that is. People who have celiac disease, which is only about 1% of the population, cannot break down that protein. The result is that there is inflammation in the gut at that site that prevents other nutrients from getting into the bloodstream. The rest of the people who have a reaction to eating starch with lots of gluten have what's called a gluten insensitivity. But we are not naturally insensitive to gluten in wheat. Scientists know right now that the lining of our intestines is inflamed. So when there's lots of inflammation, sometimes a crack or hole can break through that delicate membrane between the gut and the bloodstream, and that allows all kinds of bad substances to get through and into our bloodstream. And then, of course, they can go to our brain and other organs. What that causes is an immune response not unlike autoimmune diseases such as lupus, psoriasis, or type 1 diabetes. What causes this damage to the lining of our gut is the problem, not the wheat itself. Now, the majority of scientists right now are in agreement that it is something in our food supply that's causing the damage. And many scientists are pointing to both pesticides and herbicides like Roundup, among other killing agents. There could be multiple insecticides in our food right now. So the gluten in the wheat is not the bad guy. It is the break in the lining of our membrane between the intestines and our bloodstream. Removing gluten from the diet will improve symptoms because gluten is a big protein that our body thinks is the enemy and attacks when it enters our bloodstream. So the symptoms get better, but the lack of gluten will not repair the damage to the lining of our intestines. Unless the wheat is organic, the wheat still has Roundup in it as we're shoving it into our mouths. What we need to do is eliminate the Roundup and the herbicides that come along with it, pesticides, and at least some of the chemical preservatives, EDTA especially, also polysorbate 60. Most nutritionists believe now that returning to a non-GMO diet will eliminate those gluten insensitivity symptoms. If you want to switch to gluten-free products, certainly not a bad idea if you're actively having symptoms. There are many available substitutes. There's rice flour, potato flour, corn flour. The problem is that there are significantly fewer nutrients in all of those flours. If you're actively having symptoms of gluten insensitivity, you may need to back off of the gluten until your gut heals. But ideally, once your gut is healed, you should be able to tolerate organic or at least non-GMO whole grains. All of the substitute products for wheat have less fiber, less protein, less iron, and less magnesium than the wheat, barley, and oats. Now, if you're going to substitute gluten for another flour, and you don't care which one it is, oat flour is high in protein, has more fiber, and is more nutritious than all of the others. And obviously, whole grains like organic rye are also nutritious substitutes for the wheat. Perhaps the most important nutrient of all when you're talking grains is the fiber in the whole grains. Technically, it's not a real nutrient, but it's very important to our overall health, especially for heart disease and diabetes prevention. Okay, now I'm off my soapbox and wrap this up. Remember to keep your eyes on the prize, which is your overall health. And by all means, enjoy what you're eating. That's all I have for you today. Be well and stay tuned next week for another episode of Healing Outside the Box.